All right, so you wanted a deep dive on global wealth trends,
We heard you.
and we got the perfect source to dig into.
The UBS Global Wealth Report for 2024.
Yep, that's the one.
It's pretty incredible, actually.
30 years of data
Yeah.
covering 56 markets.
It really is a treasure trove.
If you want to understand how wealth is created,
Absolutely.
how it's distributed, how it's transferred
They
globally.
actually redesigned the report this year.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Nice.
They're really emphasizing clear and
Yeah.
simple data presentation.
Which is fantastic for us.
Absolutely.
So for this deep dive, we're focusing on
Yeah.
the 15 years since the 2008 financial crisis.
Very right.
And guess what?
What?
The report shows the world is getting richer.
It is.
And not just the one percenters either.
No, not at all.
Pretty interesting, right?
Global wealth did dip a little in 2022,
Wow.
but in 2023, it bounced back
Okay.
with a 4.2% increase.
In U.S. dollar terms, right?
That is correct.
So even with inflation and everything going on,
Yeah.
people are still building wealth.
It's not just in spite of it, though.
Yeah.
This growth is reflected in local currencies as well.
Really?
So we're seeing real increases across many economies.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
The EMEA region,
EMEA.
Europe,
Oh,
the
okay.
Middle East, and Africa.
Okay.
They're leading the charge at 4.8% growth,
Wow.
followed pretty closely by the Asia-Pacific region
Okay.
at 4.4%.
So I'm guessing some countries are doing better than others.
Of course.
Right. I mean, what about those that were hit hard
Exactly.
by currency fluctuations
Yeah.
or other events?
Sure. Take Turkey, for instance.
Okay.
They saw a wild
Yeah.
157.78% wealth increase
Seriously?
in local currency.
Wow.
But then you look at Cyprus,
Yeah.
and they actually had a contraction of over 30%.
Wow. Those are some pretty extreme examples.
Yeah.
It really shows how different countries are handling things.
Yeah, even within Western Europe, it's not a uniform picture.
Okay.
The UK stands out,
Oh, how so?
nearly hitting 10% growth.
Wow.
The only one in Europe to come close, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
That's impressive.
And then there's Japan.
What about them?
They had some currency challenges, remember?
Oh, right, right.
So their wealth in US dollar terms
Yeah.
only grew by 2%. But if you look at it in local currency,
Yeah.
the growth was over 9%.
So it really does matter what currency you're using.
It highlights what we call the currency effect.
So you got to look at both sides of the coin
You have to consider both US dollar and local currency figures.
to really get the full picture.
Get the most accurate perspective, yeah.
Okay, so short term,
Yeah.
things are looking, pretty decent.
Yeah.
But what about the long game?
That's an interesting question.
Are we on track for sustainable growth?
Well, that's where it gets a bit more complicated.
How so?
We see these yearly ups and downs, obviously. But the report also shows that global wealth growth has actually slowed down over the long term.
Oh, really?
Between 2000 and 2010,
Okay.
we were averaging 7% growth each year.
Wow.
But from 2010 to 2023,
Yeah.
that dropped down to 4.5%.
That's a pretty significant drop.
It is.
Is that just a global average or what?
It's fairly widespread, actually. Out of the 56 markets they studied, 53 are showing the slowdown.
Really?
Yeah, even powerhouses like China and India
Wow.
have seen their annual wealth growth
Yeah.
cut by more than half
That's 2010.
since 2010, yeah.
So what's behind this slowdown?
It's probably a mix of things.
Like that?
Well, demographics play a role
Uh-huh.
and the lasting effects of the 2008 crisis
Yeah.
in some markets.
Makes sense.
Like take the US, for example.
Okay.
They bucked the global trend.
Did
They
they?
went from 3.7% growth
Yeah.
to 6.3%.
Wow. Why is that?
Well, because they were hit hard in '08 by
Right.
the housing crisis, obviously.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now they're in a recovery phase.
I see.
But other countries like Brazil, the UAE, Australia,
Yeah.
they've actually seen their annual growth decrease
Okay.
by over 2/3.
2/3.
That's a huge shift.
It is.
And it just goes to show
Yeah.
that there's no single explanation
Right.
for these trends.
So we've got this overall wealth growth,
Mm-hmm.
but what about the distribution?
The age-old question.
Is everyone benefiting equally?
Right.
Or is it the rich get richer
Yeah.
and the poor get poorer?
That's what we're trying to figure.
Okay, so unpack that for me.
Wait.
What's the good news?
The good news is
Yeah.
that the lowest wealth bracket,
Okay.
those with less than $10,000,
Yeah.
it's shrunk significantly since 2000.
Really?
That suggests upward mobility.
So more people are climbing out of poverty.
It seems that way, yeah.
That's fantastic.
Now, the other end of the spectrum.
The ultra-wealthy, that's where it gets a little more complex.
How so?
The highest wealth bracket,
Mm-hmm.
individuals with over $1 million,
Yeah.
it's tripled in size.
So more millionaires,
Right.
but also a widening gap.
It seems so.
Is there any way to measure that gap?
There is, actually. The report uses something called the Gini coefficient
Okay.
to analyze inequality,
Okay.
and it's not a straightforward story.
So tell me more about this Gini coefficient.
Okay, so in North America,
Yeah.
the Gini coefficient has actually decreased.
So less inequality there.
Right, but then you look at places like Latin America,
Hmm.
Eastern Europe,
Uh-huh.
and Asia,
Okay.
and it's generally increased.
So it's rising in some parts of the world,
It appears so.
but declining in others.
It's not just about whether it's going up or down.
Okay.
It's also about where the wealth is.
I see.
Even within Western Europe.
Yeah.
You've got contrasting examples.
Like what?
Spain and Finland,
Mm-hmm.
they've seen rising inequality. But Germany, Austria, Switzerland,
Okay.
the Netherlands,
Yeah.
they've actually seen a decrease.
So it's not just about inequality going up or down.
Right.
It's about where that wealth is concentrated.
Exactly.
So we need to look at both things.
Absolutely.
Inequality and absolute wealth levels
We have
to
to.
get the full picture.
It's about understanding the nuances
Yeah.
within regions and countries.
So,
You can't just consider how evenly wealth is distributed.
right.
You also need to understand
Yeah.
the overall prosperity of that society.
That makes sense.
You mentioned absolute wealth levels.
What is it?
The report also dives into the difference between average and median wealth. And this is key
Yeah.
to understand how wealth is spread out.
Okay.
Average wealth can be a little misleading.
How so?
It can be skewed
Okay.
by a small number of ultra-wealthy individuals.
Right. So median wealth is more representative.
It gives you a better idea
Yeah.
of the typical person's wealth.
And what does the report say about that?
Well, it shows that in many countries,
Yeah.
the average wealth
Uh,
is much higher than the median wealth.
which means a small number of people
Exactly.
hold a disproportionate amount of the wealth.
That's right.
Where are we seeing this gap most?
Well, some of the biggest discrepancies
Yeah.
are in Switzerland,
Okay.
France,
Uh-huh.
Mexico,
Okay.
China,
Mm-hmm.
Hong Kong,
Right.
Taiwan, the U.S.,
Yeah.
Brazil,
Okay.
and
UAE. So this gap can actually influence growth rates, right?
It can.
How does that work?
The report uses examples
Right.
like China, Singapore, Germany, and Switzerland
Okay.
to show how this gap
Yeah.
can affect the pace of growth
Uh-huh.
experienced by different groups.
So it's not just about the overall growth.
Right.
It's about how that growth is distributed.
It's about how that pie is sliced.
Okay. I like that analogy.
We need to look at both the
Right.
size of the pie
Mhm.
and how it's divided.
To get the full picture. Is
Exactly.
there anything else we can learn?
Well, interestingly,
Yeah.
the report shows
Mm-hmm.
that comparing the growth rates
Okay.
of average and median wealth
Yeah.
can reveal trends
Okay.
in wealth distribution
No.
across different income brackets.
Right.
They use examples like Italy, Spain,
Okay.
Greece, the U.S., and the U.K.
Mm-hmm.
to illustrate this point,
So we need to look at how these figures change over time
to see if wealth is becoming more concentrated.
or more evenly distributed.
Exactly.
So it's like looking at the finer details
Yes.
of wealth
But I think you were
distributed.
understanding the nuances
Yeah.
of those trends.
We need to consider the growth,
Yes.
the distribution, and the experiences of different income groups.
To get the most accurate picture.
Okay, so we've talked about growth,
Yes.
distribution, inequality.
Right.
Is there anything in this report
There is.
that gives us hope for the future?
One of the most compelling aspects is wealth mobility.
Okay, I like the sound of that.
The key takeaway is that
Yeah.
no matter where you start,
Mm-hmm.
you're more likely to climb up
Then to fall down.
than to fall down. Exactly.
That is good news.
So are we talking baby steps here
All right.
or big leaps?
Yeah.
They analyze it over a 30-year period,
Wow.
and this upward trend
Yeah.
is consistent
Across all wealth brackets.
across all wealth brackets. Yeah.
Amazing.
It really challenges that idea that
Yeah.
wealth is static
Right.
and emphasizes the potential
Yeah.
for improvement.
Do they give any specific examples?
They do. They looked at individuals who
Yep.
were in the lowest bracket
Oh, yeah.
back in 2000
Yeah.
and analyzed their chances of moving up
Within a decade.
within a decade.
Yeah.
here.
So upward mobility is possible
It seems so.
across the board.
And it's not just about the bottom rung.
Okay.
They also looked at those
Yeah.
who are in the middle bracket.
In 2000. So
Yeah.
even from the middle.
Upward movement is possible.
What about those at the very top?
What about them?
Any chance of falling from grace?
Interestingly,
Yeah.
the risk of falling out of the highest bracket
Mm-hmm.
has decreased over time.
So the analysis shows
It does.
that upward movement is a real possibility.
For people at all levels.
That's really helpful.
It is.
So even though the system isn't perfect,
Right.
there's still room for people to work their way up.
It seems that way.
And before we get to intergenerational wealth transfer,
Yeah.
there's this other concept,
Yeah.
horizontal wealth transfer.
Mm-hmm.
Not familiar with that.
So this refers to the transfer of wealth
Okay.
between spouses,
Oh, interesting.
something that often gets overlooked.
Yeah, I can see that.
We usually think about parents to children,
Okay.
but the report explains
Yeah.
how factors like women outliving men and age gaps within couples
Okay.
contribute to this phenomenon.
And how much are we talking about here?
Well, get this. They estimate that $83.5 trillion
Wow.
will be transferred in the next 20 to 25 years.
That's a lot.
And $9 trillion of that
Yeah.
will happen between spouses.
$9 trillion.
It's a huge amount.
Is this a global thing?
They break it down regionally.
Okay.
And it seems the Americas are
Yeah.
playing a leading role.
Interesting.
It just goes to show
Yeah.
these trends are influenced by a lot of factors.
Absolutely.
Demographics, social structures, cultural norms.
All of that.
It all shapes these wealth dynamics.
So let's shift gears a bit
Okay,
and talk about what the report predicts
right.
for the future.
What's in store for global wealth?
Yeah.
Well, the overall outlook is pretty optimistic.
Good.
The report predicts that wealth per adult
Mm-hmm.
will continue to grow
In most markets.
in most markets by 2028.
Okay. That's good news.
And here's where things get really interesting.
Okay. I'm listening.
They anticipate a rising share
Yeah.
of emerging economies.
In global wealth.
In global wealth, yes.
Interesting.
They project these economies
Yeah.
to hold over 30% of global wealth in 2024
Wow.
and reach nearly 32% by 2028.
So that's a pretty major shift
It is.
in the global balance of power.
It signals a potential power shift
Yeah.
in the global economy.
That's a big deal.
It means new opportunities
Yeah.
for investment and growth.
Okay. So a rising tide lifts all boats.
Well, not necessarily. We have to remember
Yeah.
that wealth distribution
Right.
within these markets
Yeah.
is also a factor.
Okay. Good point.
But the growth potential is definitely there.
And it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Absolutely.
So emerging markets are on the rise.
Mm-hmm.
What about the millionaire club?
Also on the rise.
Are we going to see more people joining those ranks?
The report says yes.
Okay.
They predict a continued increase
Mm-hmm.
in the number of millionaires.
Well, across how many markets?
52 of the 56 markets.
Wow. That's a lot.
Some markets,
Yeah.
like Japan and Korea,
Right. They're expected to see
yeah,
over a 25% increase
in millionaires.
in U.S. dollar millionaires. Yes.
A lot of new millionaires.
Taiwan is even more interesting.
How so?
They're projected to have a surge
Yeah.
of almost 50%, driven by organic growth
Uh.
and immigration.
Of wealthy foreigners.
Yes.
So specific industries
Yeah.
and immigration patterns.
They're all shaping things.
Yeah. Okay. So overall,
Yeah.
it sounds like we're in for continued growth
It seems so.
with emerging markets leading the way.
They are definitely front and center.
Any big changes predicted
Well, not really.
in terms of asset allocation
Right.
or debt levels?
The report doesn't expect
Yeah.
any major shifts in those areas.
Yeah.
They see a steady evolution
Of current trends.
of current trends. Yeah,
That's good for investors who like stability,
it is.
but it's also a reminder
It is.
that the global economy
Yeah.
is always in motion.
Always.
So we've covered a lot.
Global wealth growth,
Mm-hmm.
distribution patterns,
Yeah,
the rise of emerging markets,
absolutely.
and the potential for upward mobility.
Right.
Anything else in the report?
Oh, there is one more trend.
Okay, what's that?
The continued growth
Yeah.
of individuals with a net worth
Okay.
exceeding $50 million.
So the ultra wealthy.
The top tier of
And
the
the-
wealth pyramid.
So what's the report's take on this?
It highlights this phenomenon
Yeah.
that's been building for years.
What phenomena?
The consolidation of wealth at the very top.
Oh, I see.
And despite overall wealth growth
Yeah.
across different segments,
Mhm.
the report predicts
Okay.
that the number of individuals
In this category.
in this ultra-high net worth category
Yeah.
will continue to rise.
That's a pretty thought-provoking finding.
It is.
What are the implications of this?
Well, it raises questions
Now what?
about social mobility,
Okay.
economic inequality,
Uh-huh.
and even political influence.
Mm.
The report doesn't dive deep.
Into those consequences.
Not really, no.
But it does draw attention to it.
It does.
So understanding these trends isn't just about personal finances.
No.
It's about understanding broader forces.
It's about the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
It's about recognizing the connection
Yeah.
between individual wealth and the well-being of society.
I like that.
We need to consider both.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground
We have.
in this first part of our deep dive.
Yes.
We've explored global wealth growth, distribution patterns,
Yeah.
the rise of emerging markets,
Right.
and the potential for upward mobility.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But there's still more to unpack.
Oh, there is?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm ready for more.
In our next segment,
Okay.
we'll go deeper
Okay.
into wealth transfer. We'll
Sorry.
explore both horizontal and intergenerational dynamics.
I'm excited for that.
And we'll examine
Yeah.
specific regional trends and discuss what it all means
All right.
for you, the listener.
Stay tuned, everyone.
We'll be right back. You know, getting ready for this,
Yeah.
I was really struck by how much the report emphasizes
Yeah.
this whole wealth transfer thing.
It's not just about who's getting richer, right?
It's about how that wealth is moving
Yeah.
across generations and even within families.
You're talking about that horizontal transfer.
Exactly.
That was a new one for me.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it really
They
is.
break down the numbers and show how much wealth
Yeah.
is expected to move between spouses
Before it even gets to the kids.
before the next generation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So things like differing life expectancies between men and women
Right.
and those age gaps within couples,
Yeah.
they're driving this trend.
To say like $9 trillion, right?
$9 trillion
Will be transferred between spouses.
in the next 20 to 25 years.
That's a big chunk
It is.
of that total $83.5 trillion that's supposed to be passed on.
It really makes you think
Yeah.
about inheritance.
It's not just a one-way street.
It's not just parents to kids. There's this whole other dimension
It's happening at the same time.
within the same generation.
So it's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
It highlights the importance of planning
Not just for yourself, but for the family.
for the whole family.
If you're not thinking about these transfers,
You're missing a big part of the picture.
absolutely.
And it's not just about the numbers either.
Right.
It's about those human dynamics.
What do you mean?
They point out that the average age of those passing on wealth
Okay.
is just over 84,
Okay.
while the recipients are around 59.
So there's this gap
Was this period
where spouses are managing the wealth.
before passing it on?
So it's not just a lump sum handover.
It's about managing it responsibly
for quite a while.
for a significant amount of time.
It makes you wonder how many people are ready for that.
That's a great question.
It raises awareness about financial literacy,
It does.
especially as global wealth grows.
And these transfers get bigger.
Okay, so enough about that.
What's next?
Millionaires.
Ah, yes.
I was reading that part and daydreaming,
I can imagine.
joining the club.
It's a tempting thought.
They say the number of millionaires will keep going up
It does seem that way.
across most markets.
And their findings on wealth mobility suggest it's not impossible.
They found that upward movement
Hmm.
is more common than downward.
No matter where you start.
And even though those big leaps from the bottom
Yeah.
to the top are rare,
They're not impossible.
it's a good reminder
It is.
that while building wealth takes time
It does.
and effort,
Absolutely.
the potential is there.
And it's not just about individual effort either.
What else is there
It's about those broader economic trends.
that shape wealth creation?
Exactly.
So what's the secret sauce?
Well, the report points to several things.
Okay, like what?
The performance of financial markets,
Okay.
economic growth in many parts of the world, even immigration patterns.
Oh, interesting.
They can all contribute.
So it's about being part of a thriving economy
It's about understanding those trends.
and how they create opportunities,
And this trend is likely to continue.
with emerging markets leading the way.
They are really taking center stage.
That's exciting.
It means more
Full
potential.
growth and mobility.
especially in those rapidly developing regions.
It's a dynamic landscape.
It is
And this report is a good guide.
a valuable roadmap.
Speaking of roadmaps,
Yeah,
the report doesn't shy away from challenges,
it doesn't.
like wealth distribution.
And inequality.
They dig into how the proportion of adults
Yeah.
in different wealth brackets
Mhm.
has changed over time.
They show both the progress
Okay.
and the disparities.
So what did they find?
One thing that stood out
Yeah.
was the shrinkage
Okay.
of the lowest wealth bracket.
Since when?
Since 2000,
That's a good sign, right?
it is.
It means people are climbing out of poverty.
But at the same time,
Yeah.
the highest bracket,
Those millionaires.
yes, tripled in size.
So more people are escaping poverty?
Yeah.
But the concentration at the top is growing.
It's a complex issue.
It is.
They use that Gini coefficient,
Right, to measure inequality
and the trends vary,
across different regions.
even within countries.
Like North America has seen a decrease.
But Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Asia,
Has seen an increase.
generally, yeah,
And even within Western Europe,
right.
you have different situations.
Like Spain and Finland,
Yeah.
inequality is rising.
But in Germany, Austria, Switzerland,
And the Netherlands.
it's decreasing.
So it's not a simple story.
It's not one size fits all.
They emphasize looking at both
Okay.
inequality and absolute wealth levels.
To get the complete picture.
You have to understand
Yeah.
the overall prosperity of a society.
So it's not just about closing the gap.
Right.
It's about making sure everyone has a chance.
To achieve a decent standard of living.
Absolutely.
And that needs a multifaceted approach.
Addressing things like education,
Yeah.
access to opportunities.
Exactly.
Now the report gets into
Mhm.
how wealth is measured
Right.
and how different metrics,
Can paint different pictures.
they talk about average versus median wealth,
It's crucial for understanding.
how wealth is spread out
Average wealth can be misleading.
because of those ultra wealthy individuals.
Indian wealth is more realistic.
And what do they find?
That in many countries,
Yeah.
average wealth is significantly higher
And median wealth,
than median wealth.
meaning wealth isn't evenly distributed.
And we see this in places like Switzerland,
Like-
France, Mexico, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Brazil, the UAE.
That gap
It can have big implications.
for growth and mobility.
They use examples like China, Singapore,
Okay.
Germany, Switzerland to show how it affects different groups.
It's not just about the growth itself,
Right.
but how it's shared.
They even get into
Yeah.
comparing the growth rate
Average and median wealth
to see trends in distribution,
across income brackets.
using examples like Italy, Spain,
Okay.
Greece, the US, and the UK.
It's fascinating.
It's about understanding those nuances
Yeah.
of wealth trends,
You got to consider the
the
distribution,
dynamics,
the drivers of wealth creation.
all of it.
And that brings us back
You know
to
what?
wealth mobility.
That was encouraging.
Upward movement is more likely
And downward.
no matter where you start
It challenges this idea.
of wealth being fixed.
It shows potential for improvement.
They give some good examples.
Yeah, like those in the lowest bracket in 2000.
And their chances of moving up.
And it's not just the bottom row
They also look at those in the middle.
in 2000.
Yeah.
So upward movement is possible from there, too.
They even show that the risk of falling.
From the highest bracket has gone down.
So it paints this picture
A dynamic picture
where upward mobility is real.
for everyone.
Before we get to intergenerational transfer,
Mm-hmm.
the report talks about
Horizontal transfer.
between spouses.
It often gets overlooked.
When we talk about inheritance,
They shed light on it.
driven by things like life expectancy,
And age gaps.
and the numbers are huge,
They estimate $9 trillion
will be transferred between spouses.
in the next 20 to 25 years.
It's a lot of money.
It is
It stresses the need for planning,
for families.
not just individuals,
Couples need to be prepared,
to manage that wealth.
especially if it comes earlier in life.
Then traditional inheritance.
It adds another layer of complexity.
So let's talk about those millionaires again.
Okay.
They predict more millionaires, right?
They do.
Across most markets.
It seems like reaching that status
Yeah.
might not be so far-fetched
Upward movement is more common.
than downward.
And those big jumps, while rare,
They're not impossible.
it takes time.
Effort.
But the potential is there.
It's about understanding those broader trends,
Then drive wealth creation,
like financial market performance,
economic growth.
immigration patterns.
It's about being in the right place at the right time,
And this trend is likely to continue
with emerging markets leading the way.
Exactly.
more potential for growth,
In the coming years,
especially in those developing regions.
it's an exciting time.
And this report is a great resource.
A guide to understanding it all.
Now, what about the future?
The report's pretty optimistic.
Yeah.
They see continued growth.
In wealth per adult
By 2028,
and emerging economies,
we'll play a big role
they'll make up over 30% of global wealth
as soon as 2024.
and nearly 32% by 2028.
It's a testament to their growing power.
China, India, Brazil,
They're becoming major forces.
and this shift
It'll create opportunities.
for investors.
Absolutely.
More millionaires, too.
Across 52 markets.
Explosive growth in Japan and Korea.
Over 25% more millionaires.
And Taiwan.
Almost 50% more.
Driven by their microchip industry.
And immigration.
So what about the rest of the world?
No major shifts expected.
In asset allocation.
Or debt levels.
Steady evolution.
Emerging markets taking center stage.
Good news for investors.
Seeking stability and growth.
The global economy is always changing.
But there are trends we can follow.
And this report helps us do that.
It's a guide to the global wealth landscape.
Before we wrap up, let's talk about
Those with over $50 million.
the ultra-wealthy.
The report highlights a trend.
What trend?
The consolidation of wealth at the top.
And it's been building for years.
The report predicts it will continue.
More individuals in that category.
Despite overall wealth growth,
It makes you
it
think
raises questions.
about social mobility,
Inequality.
political influence,
The report doesn't go deep into that.
but it raises awareness
About the evolving landscape.
and the challenges.
It's about understanding the bigger picture.
That individual wealth is connected.
To the well-being of society.
So we've covered a lot today.
Growth, distribution, mobility, transfer.
This report is packed with information.
That's given us a lot to think about.
It's fascinating how the report zooms in on different parts of the world
Yeah, it's like looking through a magnifying glass.
to see those regional nuances of wealth.
And Western Europe's a great example.
You might think it's this one big economic block.
But it's not.
The report shows a lot of variation.
In wealth growth across those countries.
It's like a mosaic, not a monolith.
Exactly.
Like Turkey, their average wealth per adult.
It's grown incredibly since 2008.
The report says over 1,700% in local currency.
That's a massive increase.
They've done well over the past 15 years.
But then you have countries like Greece.
They've actually seen a decline
It shows the lasting impact of the 2008 crisis.
and the challenges they've faced since.
Economic growth isn't a given.
Even in developed regions.
There are always winners and losers.
And to really understand the distribution,
You can't just look at averages.
you have to consider the median wealth
Because averages can be skewed.
by those ultra-wealthy folks
The median wealth gives us a more realistic view.
of the typical person.
And the report shows those gaps.
Between average and median,
And so many countries.
Switzerland, France, Mexico,
China, Hong Kong, Taiwan.
the US, Brazil, the UAE,
It's a global pattern
that we need to pay attention to.
because it affects so many things.
Education, healthcare,
Social mobility, even political influence.
it's a complex issue.
That needs some serious thought.
So we've looked at the present.
What about the future?
What does the report say?
The outlook is still positive.
For wealth growth
They expect it to continue
by 2028.
in most markets, yes.
And emerging markets are key.
They're going to play a huge role
They'll represent over 30% of global wealth
by 2024.
and nearly 32% by 2028.
It shows the rising power.
Of China, India, Brazil,
They're becoming economic powerhouses.
and that could mean opportunities,
For investors.
especially those looking beyond traditional markets.
It's an interesting time to be following these trends
And the report's a great guide.
to help us understand it all.
And it's not just about countries.
There will be more millionaires too.
They're predicting that across 52 markets.
It highlights how dynamic the global economy is
And the potential for success is there.
in so many different parts of the world.
So this report has given us a deep dive,
Into global wealth.
the trends, the challenges, the future outlook.
It's been a fascinating exploration.
I hope our listeners have enjoyed it.
If you want to learn more,
The full report is online.
the link is in the show notes.
And as always,
Talk to a financial advisor
to figure out your own goals.
and create a strategy that works for you.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive.
Into global wealth trends
We'll be back soon.
with another fascinating topic.
Thanks for listening, everyone.